is a strange paradox in human suffering. We often know exactly what we should do to feel better, yet we find ourselves repeating the same pattern, the same habit, and the same inner battles. It is not because we are weak, it is because much of what drives us does not live in our conscious mind. Today, we explore why real healing requires us to look beneath the surface. Welcome to Mind Over Matter, where we explore resilience, inner strength, and the deeper psychology behind lasting change. Today, I am joined by Dr. Christiaan Oranje, whose life journey bridges psychology and spirituality in a way few conversations do. We are talking about resolving suffering today requires working with the unconscious, not just positive thinking or conscious effort. This episode is for anyone who feels stuck in patterns they have already outgrown but cannot seem to escape. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nazish. It's a pleasure to be here again with you.
Wonderful. So, Christian, before we talk about theory or tools, I want to start with you. When you look back on your own life, when did you realize that suffering is not something you could fix through willpower or understanding alone?
Ah, well, first of all, I have to admit that the reason that I started to understand that that's not working is because I did apply it the way that I tried to fix it with my willpower. So that's the kind of the lesson, learning it the hard way, I would say. Um, so that's the first thing that pops up. What I would like to comment on is the beautiful introduction you made, talking about the unconscious. Because how is it that I promote and encourage my clients to not work so much with the mind and not so much with the subconscious, but actually work with the unconscious? And the reason for that is that I have come to understand that in the unconscious, we hold the root causes of our suffering. And as long that stays untouched, it works like a core driver. It sparks and it fuels, it activates the habits that we carry in our subconscious. And that makes us, as you rightly so pointed out in your introduction, that creates situations that we know that something is not good for us, or we know it's not good to say these things or do these things. And when we are in the situation, we see ourselves, to our great disappointment and frustration, we see and hear ourselves do and say the same things over again. And that has to do with the working of the core driver at play. So I noticed in my own life that I can, and that, yes, I used my mind, of course, with changing the habits that I found in my subconscious and try to reprogram it and do all the kind of affirmation work and you name it, meditation, yoga, and so on and so forth. But I noticed that it didn't last. I found myself in situations, yes, I worked so hard, but then over time felt it started to fade away and eventually it fall back into place again. And I found myself getting into the same kind of habits again and again and found myself at square one. And that made me wonder what is happening here. And that brought me and that led me to this discovery within myself that, oh, there's actually also an unconscious. And oh, in there's the root cause, which works like the core driver that activates those habits, but also when on a subconscious level I release it and I do the work to change it, it's the core driver when it is stayed there untouched, as I just mentioned. That's what causes it to pull it back into place over time, where it was before. So the necessity to work on the core drivers at this particular moment in time is required in order to really create change that sticks, create change that is durable, sustainable, and long lasting.
Absolutely. That is such a beautiful approach, and that is such a unique perspective to the show. Mm,
Mhm.
You have
Yeah.
framed it so nicely, I must say. And so I think many people believe that once they understand where their pain comes from, healing should naturally follow. From your experience, why does that awareness often fail to create a real change?
Because it is done through and become clear in their conscious mind. But we are created with a conscious mind and subconscious mind and unconscious mind. And the characteristic of the sub and unconscious is that we have stored things in there, of which the name for it is our conditioning, which, by the way, I like to call our negative patterns of behavior in thinking, limiting beliefs, feeling, negative emotions, and how we act, including the poor choices and decisions we make. And that conditioning, what we stored in our sub and unconscious is, and that is the characteristic, we are not yet or not anymore conscious of what we've stored in there. So on a conscious level, we think we are clear what to do and so on, how to resolve it and what actually the cause is and da, 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 da. But what actually happens is that what we have figured out consciously is overruled by the forces, and that comes back again to the root cause that we hold in our unconscious, which works without us being aware of that it does its thing what it does.
I agree. And, you have framed it so nicely. I believe what you are pointing is that insight can inform us, but it does not necessarily transform us.
Yes, because well, that what we are not conscious of is something that there's a reason why it has come into our subconscious and unconscious, and it is often something that is painful, challenging, difficult to face first and foremost. So that causes often resistance to go there. At the same time, in my life at least, I have not ever had a person when I was young that showed me and explained me that, for instance, I have also a sub and unconscious, explained what the working of the sub and unconscious is, showed me by example of how to work with it and how important it is to really do the internal work there. In other words, to become conscious again, become aware again of what we are holding in our sub and unconscious. So I just did what most people do. I carry it with me and yeah, I saw its effects having on my outer situations, but not knowing actually where it was coming from, and therefore also no clue what to do about it to really, again, create that change that sticks.
Absolutely. And it is so well said. I must agree. You have spoken about becoming a prisoner of habits that once brought comfort. How does
Yes.
that unconscious turn survival strategies into long term suffering?
Well, as you know, we have been on the podcast together before, and as you know, and it's particularly good to mention again for the listeners who are new to listening to me. Uh, I primarily work with affluent, soul-seeking women over 40 who had it all, yet still feel empty or unfulfilled and struggling to be happy. Now, in the world of high society, to give you a little bit of a context, there's an unspoken rule that it is considered to be not done when you speak about your deeper, darker feelings, call them the negative feelings and thoughts. And by the way, I'm not here to criticize that rule because I know why it has been put in place and what its function is. What I do want to put out is what the consequences are. The consequences of such a rule is that it trains people to keep up appearance and to smile even when they're falling apart inside. And they learn the habit of, that's the word, the habit of numbing, which is another word for suppressing, pushing what I don't like or feel, or what I actually am not allowed to feel and think into our their sub and unconscious. Now, what you can see, and the reason why I like to use working with them as to illustrate certain principles that are at play, that with them I see certain patterns the most obviously playing out. And um, for instance, the numbing part, what it ends up towards is that the matter works over the mind. Matter becomes the most important in the mind. The matter rules the mind and not vice versa. And since it is a habit, which then is stored in the unconscious, one of the, by the way, subconscious is a wonderful feature in itself. Look at, for those who have a driver license, you step into the car after you've learned it and you drive away and you enjoy the ride and do not have to learn it every time again when you step into it and want to drive off. And that is the positive function and the feature that helps us actually to live our lives the way we do, like driving cars. That, and that's also part of the good news. The reason why it works so well, what we put in our subconscious, is because at some point it goes on autopilot, on automatic. Like again, driving the car, we don't have to think about it. It's automatically doing the right, doing for us the right things we need to do to drive the car. But the same principle applies also for the negative habits like numbing and like the habit of holding on to matter more importantly than, for instance, taking care of the mind, for instance. Now, when that habit goes on autopilot, you can see all over how that plays out. People hold on, people buy more, people think that in the outside and in the material things is the thing, is where they can find the fulfillment and not feeling empty anymore. But it doesn't work because it's not how the mind works and how we work. So that's the answer to your question. How I see that certain patterns can play out in such a way that at certain moments, and I see that again with the affluent soul-seeking women I work with, it becomes it takes them hostage. They feel that they've become imprisoned by the habits that at one point earlier on has served them well, but now is going against them.
Absolutely. And from what you have spoken, it sounds like that unconscious is not trying to harm us. It is trying to protect us, but with outdated information.
Exactly. Yes, it has worked in the past, but we have changed. We have grown. We are now in a position that we very well can cope and can create our life that we wish us to live. But then the unconscious patterns that once served us again have now working now against us. And that brings me to another thing because the theme of your podcast is very inspiring to me because and that's exactly the work that I do. I invite my clients to find ways that they reverse it, that the mind becomes the most important part to pay attention at this point, and then matter follows. That is what I then explain. But what actually matters here now is how then does that work? How does it work when you put your mind over the matter and not the other way around? What I want to say about this is, again, from my own experience, I have used my mind as the willpower to change the situations that I didn't like. And I used my willpower to create the situations as I wanted it. And I speak then, of course, about the part in me that you could call the ego. When you take it very to the extreme, where you can see the most obvious where mind over matter is used in the wrong way, then you come into places where black magic is practiced and the voodoo techniques. And of course, the people here on the call, myself included, we are not the kinds of people who want to go into that direction. We do not want purposefully harm others. So that's not the way to go. But what then is and what then does it mean to use our mind over matter? Because yes, there is a correct way of doing it, but what is then the correct way? What I have experienced and what I actually, after my discovery, how it actually works, taking myself as the laboratory every day, stepping in and experimenting with the question, well, how then does it work? It works like this. First and foremost, the mind as I see it is not in itself the most important thing to work with and to work on. As I have come to understand and see it, is that the mind slash the working and function of our brain is merely a vehicle. What matters is what kind of driver we choose and allow to sit behind the steering wheel. And very quickly, let me explain what these three drivers is, because there are three. I see ourselves as humans being consistent out of a lower self, which sometimes is called the animal self. That is where the reactions and the impulses and instinctual ways of doing things come from. Our middle self, which is our human self that I'm now talking to right now. And we have our higher self, which also is sometimes called our angelic self. Now, when I present these three types of selves, I'm pretty sure that you can immediately see when you put your lower self, your animal self behind the steering wheel, versus you put your angelic higher self behind the steering wheel, what a kind of different ride that is going to be. So, needless to say, in working with the mind over matter, I highly recommend to learn the skill of putting your higher self behind the steering wheel of your mind. Then what happens is that visualization, or what sometimes is called assumptions, is the key in working with your mind over matter. It is by internally starting to visualize the situation that you would like to create, i.e., manifest, and you focus on that situation in a particular way. Normally, and that's where it usually goes wrong, we visualize and we see something that we would like to see happening, and we see that picture outside of ourselves. But when you put it outside of yourself, there's a bit of a distance there, and that is what it doesn't makes it work. The other thing is that usually in that picture that you see of the life you want to live, you do not include and see yourself in it. How the best can I explain that when you see yourself sitting or standing here, there is only so much you can see of yourself. I, for instance, see when I'm now sitting here, I see my legs, I see my hands and my underarms, but the rest of it, not so much. So when I visualize the life or the situation that I wish to manifest, it's important to see also in that picture myself as I see myself sitting here now. That means that I put myself in that image. Now, the third element is very important because, as I already said, when I see that image out there, there's a distance. I put it into the future, and as long as I visualize it in the future, it will stay in the future. So, what is necessary is to take that image and to draw that image towards me and to put it in that image, put myself in that image in the here and now, which means practically that I see myself right now, right here, in the physical material circumstances I see myself in my inner eye, I see the ideal situation I'm in, right now, right here, simultaneously as well. And then comes the last, the cherry on the cake. I focus more on the internal image or assumptions or vision that I'm visualizing as taking that as my truth, that as my reality right now, not the focus on my outer circumstances. And how does it practically look? For instance, if someone has trouble with finance, the difficulty of paying the bills, visualize that you have an X amount in the bank that makes you easily pay all the bills and you can comfortably live. And you see that money already now in the bank account. You feel, and that's the key, you feel that that money is already there. You feel that you have that available and you can spend it for whatever you need. And that is the kind of standard instead of taking the actual bank account you see right now, right here, in the numbers that appear on that. And that is the challenge, and that is the training, and that is the practice. But that is when you hold that assumption long enough and you strongly believe that that's the case, then at some point the subconscious starts to accept it, that that is the truth. And then automatically, I would say, and naturally, very organically, things start to happen in your outside circumstances that matches that inner, what you call vibration, that inner frequency. It is a universal law that that is how it works. The outer circumstances, including the people, just have to adjust itself to the inner established state of being.
Wow, that was so beautifully put. Everything you talked about right now. And I'm very sure that this is going to land with a lot of our listeners tonight. You know, everything that you talk you reframes setbacks, everything so beautifully.
Mhm. Yes, and
So,
this what I- this what I, by the way, this what I described can be applied in any kind of situation. So if, for instance, again, talking about the affluent self-seeking women I work with, it is to invite them to do things and invite them to go through a process in which they feel internally full, fulfilled, complete, and joyful, and then maintaining that state and seeing the outer circumstances adjust to that. And for that to happen, that is where the work on the unconscious is necessary in order to maintain that new required inner state, which they do want to have. And then from there, they see their outer circumstances naturally changed.
wonderful. So, for our listeners who feel exhausted by their inner struggle, what
Mhm.
would you say to them that believes they are, you know, what would you say to the part of them that believes they are broken rather than patterned?
Two things.
Yes.
In essence, and hear me well, in essence, no one is broken. However, on a human level, it's very well possible, it could be, that something, that's a difference, in essence not, but something in you, a part of you perhaps, can be broken. You can have a broken heart in a relationship. You can, in a relationship, there have experience in business that your trust is broken. You can physically have an accident where you find yourself lying on the floor and your bone is sticking out of your leg. And I find that is a very important distinction because there is a tendency to say that we are not broken and then disregard the parts and the people who really feel that there is something broken. And in my experience, when that's the case, to invite them to acknowledge and for myself to acknowledge for them that there is something broken, that's actually a step that evokes and invites healing. In that moment of acknowledgement, yes, there is something broken. That's where healing already starts to happen.
Very beautifully said. And I think, you know, lasting freedom does not come from fighting ourselves, but listening to what our unconscious has been carrying on our behalf.
Yes, and now is it my turn to say to you how beautifully put, Nazish.
Thank you so much. So, Christian, for our listeners who want to explore your work and learn more about your approach, where can they find you?
Ah, now here's the takeaway I'd like to leave you with. Whenever you want to change something, you listening here on this interview, or you are confronted with a difficult situation, what most likely happens is that it has a negative impact on how you feel and think. It makes you slide into a lower vibrational, also known as a non-resourceful state. And that's logical. We are human. For instance, being in fear or in a fight, flight, or freeze state is an example of it. However, this is the last thing you want to see happening because in those kind of situations that you're challenged, you need actually to have the energy and the vitality that gives you the clarity of mind, the strength, the determination, or whatever you need to deal with it. So, what you need is something that helps you do exactly that. Something that helps you to shift from a non resourceful, lower vibrational state into what I call a state of excellence as quickly as possible, and to maintain it while the situation you're in is still challenging and perhaps unbearable. And that is another way of saying how mind over matter works. So, for anyone listening who feels that this is something you could use, I'd love to offer you this as a small gift. It's a short downloadable ebook called The 5 Steps to Transform Any Negative Feeling or Thought, anytime, anywhere, in 7 minutes or less. I created it because when I look at my own life, I carried negative emotions and thoughts with me way longer than I had to, simply because no one ever showed me that all this can be transformed much quicker, even when needed, instantly in a moment. The advantage of this 5 steps ritual is that it prevents you from suppressing of what you don't like to feel or think, and instead can turn those negative emotions and thoughts, feelings into ones that energize, empower, and uplift you. You'll find a link in the show notes. It's a simple download. You'll receive it by email. And in addition, for those of you listening here who have it all, yet feel unfulfilled and sense the desire to take a deeper step, for you, I'm also offering a complimentary From Pointless to Purpose treasure map consultation. It's a 1 hour conversation where you can experience how I work, ask your questions directly, and explore whether I'm the right person to assist you in making the changes you want or need to make. Now, just to be clear, this is a no pressure consultation. There's no obligation. It is simply an invitation to explore.
Absolutely beautiful. And I feel, just like you said, I will make sure to include all these details into the show notes so that many, many people can reach out to you and have the benefit from
Mm,
this beautiful takeaway that you are offering to our listeners.
mm. Yeah, wonderful, great.
Yes,
I'm looking forward to it.
wonderful. So, Dr. Christian, thank you so much for joining us on Mind Over Matter. You brought such beautiful approach to this conversation.
Mhm. It's my pleasure. And I thank you for the wonderful holding space and the wonderful energy. It really inspired me to say the things that I've shared with your audience.
Absolutely. So, if this conversation resonated, take a moment to sit with what surfaced for you today. Healing is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it begins quietly, the moment we turn inward with honesty and compassion. So, until next time, take care of your mind because it shapes everything else.